Hello and welcome to today's special remote session. This is Tom Bechtold, your host from Secure World Digital. Hey, this is part of our special series with the Trustmi folks. This is AI, cybersecurity, and the new era of fraud. Today we're on episode 5, Split Defenses, how fraud slips through finance and security blind spots. So welcome everybody. I want to say thank you to the folks over at Trustmi for making these episodes possible. They had a fun idea to do like an episodal kind of series with us. And I was like, I love that kind of stuff. So it kind of keeps everything cohesive, moves us along. We have like a nice story arc throughout the whole season. It's fun. So thank you to the folks over at Trustmi for making this stuff possible. Normally I have something to say here, but we've got a lot of ground to cover and I'm not going to waste too much time, and I want to get into this conversation as well as you guys do. So real quickly, our housekeeping, we've got today's slides. If you need proof of attendance and you want to have that PDF, we have that available for you. I've got some other items loaded up in there as well, some different PDFs and URLs that you can enjoy going along with our conversation today. There's a really good report in there from the folks at Trustmi, so definitely grab that one if nothing else. Certificate of attendance will be available after about 45 minutes. If you have any audio or video issues, F5 or function F5, depending on what your machine does, that should refresh your screen. Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari tend to work very well if you're in the audience. Not necessarily if you're one of the presenters, but that doesn't matter for most of you. On demand, this is going to be recorded. We'll keep this available for the next few months. If you know folks, or maybe you want to have your CFO maybe watch this, this would be a really good one to actually probably get involved with. But have your finance team check this out, or anybody that's struggling with having conversations with these folks to get everybody in here. So you can use the link you did today. And if they're in security, they'll get 1 CPE for attending. So kind of a nice win-win. So welcome to episode 5 of the series. If you've been following, we've been exploring, like I said, how AI is reshaping cyber risk and how finance and security teams can rethink their defenses. So in episode 1, we heard from a CISO on the ecosystem-wide vulnerabilities AI is exposing. Episode 2 gave us a hacker's view with Rachel Toback, showing how easy Gen AI makes social engineering. She hacked one of our guests today on that episode. So that one was a fun one too. Episode 3, we shifted to the business side, how to measure fraud losses and show ROI, which is always what people want to know about. And episode 4 brought it all together with a live hack of a payment fraud attempt, showing just how easy it is and how these attacks can slip between teams and systems. So today, we're getting it all together, and we're going to be talking about split defenses and how fraud slips through those blind spots, right? And this time, we've got Theresa Payton on with us. She is, you've probably seen her on our remote sessions before, but if you haven't, she was named one of the most influential voices in cybersecurity. Theresa was the first female White House CIO and now leads Fortalece Solutions as their CEO. She's joined with Hillary Gamblin, our moderator for today's program. She's a content expert over at Trustmi. And I'm happy because I actually get to hang out with you guys in the audience this time. I'm going to hand things off over to Hillary. I'm going to enjoy the conversation and maybe try to get some of my answers or questions to my answers too. So Hillary, welcome. And Theresa, welcome, both of you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. This is so great. Theresa, we're so happy to have you. And before we dive into the data, I just kind of want to, it's almost kismet that we found you, because you've been talking about this for years, this need for finance and security to be working hand in glove. Why is this such an important, topic for you?
No, I appreciate the time, Hillary, and it's always great to be with you and with Tom. So this has been important to me. I came from the financial services industry, and what I saw was if you have silos in place between security and fraud and finance, criminals look for those thin spaces. And so if we all put our head down and we do the best job possible, but we don't pick it up and look around and integrate and coordinate and collaborate across those groups, there are thin spaces where they operate and they are successful. And it's not just like a story of what might happen. Silos are really a fraudster's best friend. But I firmly believe we can flip the script with teamwork. And what I'm seeing over and over again, which is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation today, is alignment isn't optional. Imagine this: a finance team spots something doesn't seem right with a wire transfer, but by the time they loop in security, the fraudster's already cashed out. This isn't something that might happen; it's something that does happen. And I think traditionally, many organizations have thought about, okay, finance owns the dollars, security owns the offense and defense, and fraud, that's where we have the follow the money investigation skills. I have to tell you, when I see these groups working in concert, most attackers cannot breach their coordinated efforts.
Well, I actually like how you said silos are a fraudster's best friend. And to kind of get an idea where everybody in the audience, how they feel about where their company is sitting, with collaboration, I'd like to start with a poll. So we're going to ask you how to describe the collaboration between you and your finance and security teams. So strong collaboration, moderate. Let's give you a couple of minutes to see. I'm actually a little interested to see what people say.
I can't wait to see the results.
I know. I feel like I've kind of set the people up here because this is actually what we asked in our survey too. So I'm comparing data from what we did from our survey with everybody, what they're going to answer. So I feel like I'm widening the pool here.
Please, everybody, be honest here, because I think it's a great way to help Trustmi with the work that they're trying to do on your behalf.
Yeah. Okay. So we got about half.
Oh, awesome.
Strong collaboration, moderate collaboration, no collaboration. That's very small. Interesting. Actually, those look really similar to the numbers that we have. We're going to go over those in a second. So it looks like everybody feels pretty happy with where they're sitting. And so maybe we'll see if after this presentation, you still feel the same way. So in this, as we said, today there's going to be three main takeaways that we want to go for. That finance and security gaps actually create blind spots that attackers exploit, and then how this allows fraudsters to bypass, as Theresa was saying, and then a smarter way to unite teams and stop the attacks before the money move. So those are our three takeaways, and I think that they're solid. And to start off with that, we're going to go for the first takeaway, which is that silos exist and hackers exploit them. So like I said, this is actually the results that we got when we did a survey. We did about 250 finance leaders, 250 security leaders in billion-dollar-plus companies, all different industries. And everybody on paper, the collaboration felt really good, similar to what you guys do. But then we started asking more questions in the survey. And when we started asking questions, we started to see that while people felt good about it, there was still being money that was getting lost. So this is actually one of the most, I think, interesting findings for us. 1 in 3 organizations say that limited collaboration between finance and securities contributed to a fraud or near miss in the last year. And that's money that they're both trying to protect, right? So that's a huge gap. So my question to you for Theresa, like, where do these silos actually live between finance and securities, and how do the fraudsters go through the seams to steal them?
Yeah, well, some of it's well-intended silos. And I'm so glad you brought up the 1/3, because AFP 2024 and FICO 2024 have some really interesting statistics. And it showed that 41% of businesses lost money to fraud. And when they did their investigation to figure out, well, how did this happen? They realized that they have to prioritize integration. So out of the 41%, those victims, when they finished their post-mortem investigation, 85% of those victims said the way to prevent fraud in the future is prioritizing integration across finance, security, and the fraud teams. That's pretty significant. The 85% said this is where we need to spend our time. I think, the other piece is some of the silos persist. Technology can be a great integrator and divider. So if you end up getting a point of presence technology that supports the mission, vision, and strategy of your business unit, and it was built for your business unit, you're naturally going to go into that silo because that's kind of how the workflow is supported. Interestingly enough, regulations, even though they promote sharing, there's practical challenges due to hierarchical organizational structures. Who has the budget? Who has the money? Who's the boss? Who calls the shots? Then you see some of the things around GLBA. So there's some concerns around, well, we don't want to run afoul of that. There's also third-party disclosures that have to be a consideration. Who knew what and when did they know it? So that can actually create informal silos. So you have technology almost creating workflow silos. Then you have regulation that's well-intended creating informal silos. And so that's where we have to have really go back to the drawing board and say, if we were to look at the human user story from beginning to end and how they interact with us, our employees, our customers, our third-party vendors, where are there opportunities for fraud to happen? And so now how do we redesign how we think about people, process, and technology to make those opportunities for fraud less available, but also when the fraud does happen, how do we spot it, hopefully in real time, to be able to shut it down?
And that's great that you've covered that there are silos that are created through culture, but they're also created through systems, workflows, processes, and then even the technology. And so the next thing we want to talk about is unified processes, so we can catch these evolving threats. And one thing that when we did our survey, we also found that was really interesting for us is that modern fraud really hits just one system, right? About 70% are multiple environments. That means email, ERP, vendor systems. And so if you look at the stats here, like about, I forget how many people do ERP, around 35 cases, right? That's your finance team. And then you look at how many people go through email. That's the security team. They're hitting both those systems, and they're going through both teams. So be honest, are most companies still defending against yesterday's model of a one system, one alert? Someone's going to come through email. They're going to ask me to move money, and I'm going to say no. Because, are companies ready for these types of attacks where they're going through both teams and they're very complex, they're multi-steps, they're going through, are teams ready for this?
Yeah, this is the challenge, because you're right. We oftentimes see what happened. We do an investigation and we say, okay, what was the root cause and how do we fix the root cause? Which, by the way, that's a really good thing to do. Then we have compliance frameworks. So now we develop our checklist because nobody wants to be out of compliance. And so you want to know, am I in compliance? Will I meet the regulatory challenges? And, everybody, those are all the things you do to be a good, sound business that your customers can trust you. But the problem is that those should be almost like in the design, but those should be the things we check off kind of as like the safety, quality assurance at the end. We really do have to reimagine, because criminals and fraudsters, they are reimagining their job every day. So every time we put in place a new checklist, a new control, a new people and process way of doing things for what happened yesterday, they say, okay, well, how do I work around multi-factor authentication then? Oh, how do I work around proof of life then? And they're successful. I want to give people hope here because it can be done. And there's a great case with JP Morgan Chase. They've actually shared some of what they've been doing publicly. So I want to share some of those things, and you can definitely look up what they've been doing. But JP Morgan Chase decided we need to unify finance, fraud, and security teams. And the way they decided to do it was using artificial intelligence. So a combination of small language models, behavioral-based analytics, machine learning, as well as a little bit of agentic AI and generative AI. They are using that to manage their cross-unit information flows. Now, JP Morgan Chase analyzes about $10 trillion a day in transactions, and they're using this to look across, well, what might security know? What might finance know? What might fraud know? And it's helping them with real threat detection. So by working together, what they have realized is by doing this on the workflow level, so now with AI, they're able to say, okay, everybody, you can keep your system if you love your system, but now we're going to have this layer of integration using these different AI tools. They have reported a huge false positive reduction. It's freeing up the fraud, finance, and security teams for more strategic collaboration. And it's freeing them up for the things that we all know systems don't catch, and they only get caught in the manual reviews. They're using graph-based AI flags, and their fraud is now getting identified using these AI flags and the humans in the loop 300 times quicker. That's a good return. 300, that's a good speed. 300 times quicker than their old legacy process. That's an incredible case study to support why this needs to be done.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because it does sound like when you say breaking down silos at big organizations, it feels like a task that can't be done. But it sounds like it can be done, right? Especially as you're saying, with the right integration with tools. But not only just tools, I think it also takes what we're talking about, more of culture, which brings me to a really important part about ownership, right? But before we even talk about ownership, there's no, actually, let's talk about ownership. No, wait, sorry, I'll go back. So before we talk about ownership, I want to talk about the idea of visibility, because in order for you to feel ownership, you need to see if something is visible to you, right? So when we were asking people in our study, you know, do you have visibility into what the other team, finance or security, is doing? Only about 27% said always, about 46 said sometimes, 14 said rarely. That's not enough, right? If you're not having visibility into someone else's work and you're not knowing the threat, then it's very easy for you to say, it's someone else's job, they'll get to it, right? If you have no idea what's going on, which brings me to this idea of ownership, right? So I actually want everybody to, I think this is a really interesting question to ask everybody. Who owns eliminating engineered fraud at your socially engineered fraud at your company? Is it finance? Is it security? Is it both of you? Are you not sure? So if you could take a minute to actually do that poll, I'm really curious to see what you guys will say. What are your guesses? Who owns it? Who normally owns it, Theresa, in your experience?
Owns which piece?
Socially engineered fraud. Who usually owns it?
Wow. You know, finance a lot of the times. But if you think about it, who knows what's going on out there? Like, who knows that there's a bypass to multi-factor authentication security?
Well, I will say that usually if the money gets sent to the wrong account, it's usually the CFO that has to answer, and their head's on the chopping block.
Correct.
So
correct.
Yeah. So there is that way to look at it, but I always feel like finance usually I ask this question because when we ask people this question, usually they're pointing the finger the other way, and that's what brought on the study to begin with. Everybody kept saying, oh, you need to talk to finance, that's their thing, or you need to talk to security, because we kept saying socially engineered fraud, and everybody kept saying it's the other person, right? And so that's why we wanted to ask this question, because, you know, like, do people feel who owns it? So let's see what our audience says.
Interesting.
Security. Were you expecting that?
No, that's interesting. So my gut instinct is that on paper that people would say both equally, because you say naturally it's a shared responsibility and it's a team sport to reduce socially engineered fraud. But that's interesting that it's security, because Socially engineered fraud, if you think about the life cycle of a transaction, so if it's internal fraud, like somebody in accounts payable is paying themselves or paying their buddies and not actually paying the real vendor. So that internal fraud, that would be a combination of like HR, personnel, security, and finance. Like obviously the right controls are not in place. If you think about socially, but it might not have been an insider, it might be somebody had an account takeover within accounts payable, and now they're paying their fraud buddies. So then the question is, oh, well then is that security? Because security owns identity and security owns access and security owns. So it's really interesting. Now, what if the fraud happens in person? What if you have brick and mortar and somebody shows up in person and commits fraud in person? Would you say it's the people on the front lines that are doing customer service? So this is an interesting, so anybody who's on here today, security, they're looking at you.
Yeah, well, and I will say, we asked the same question and we got a very similar answer too. Security was #1 when we asked about half and half who owns it. And so it's so interesting that someone that comes from the finance background is like, wait, really? I was not expecting that. And yeah, only about 27% said it was joint. Even like, I mean, I know that this survey was anonymous. What we just asked our audience to do was anonymous. And so maybe they're really putting what they feel opposed to, you know, what they should say. But obviously there is not an idea of shared ownership, and there needs to be an idea of shared ownership, right? If we're going to break down silos. And so how can we redesign accountability and ownership so it's truly shared? It's not just on paper, it's in practice.
And if I can make a point, if you think security owns fraud prevention, you're going to have a very friction-full customer experience. Because if you say to security, so in security, we're trained, don't let anyone in, trust no one. I mean, what do we call our architecture? We need a zero trust architecture. Okay, you do not want the security team designing your customer experience. So from a fraud prevention standpoint, if you want a delightful, seamless, low friction customer experience, the business has to design that. I mean, unless you just have amazing creative designers on the security team. So I want to kind of recalibrate everybody's mindset here. Like, fraud prevention is owned by everybody, and you do not want security driving the design of the customer experience. That's just my opinion, having been a chief information officer and just being in the room designing something for a customer that I know the customer has to love. I know from a security standpoint, I can't allow bad people into the bank. And then I know from a fraud loss perspective, I have my fraud loss prevention officer I'm accountable to. So as the CIO, there's multiple stakeholders here. Believe me, I loved my information security team that supported me in banking. I would never let them design a customer experience. And if they were here on this panel with us today, Hillary, they would say, Theresa's right, we should never design the customer experience, because we would make it clunky and hard, and they'd probably give up before we got done, but it would be safe and there'd be no fraud.
So of course we want them to own it. So how can we have them own it together? What are some ways? Culture, structure, leadership? How do we incentivize? What can we do to make people feel that when we give them this question again, almost all of them say it's joint?
Start at the beginning. Like, take one human user story, whatever it is, account opening, account closure, account funding, a transaction, a big transaction, a little transaction, and take that human user story and have these key stakeholders in the room and just have somebody walk through, what does it feel like to the human in this human user story? And then who are all the players and actors around that human and the technology that just makes it all work? And then once everybody has that common understanding, that common operating picture, now you start to think about, well, what are our hand in glove ways that we can work together, not just to stop fraud, but to increase efficiency, not just to make sure that nobody gets in, but to figure out from a seamless perspective, how do we make it seamless and elegant, but leverage technology to keep the bad guys out. So there is a way to do this without sacrificing everybody understanding what their own direct accountability is. Shared accountability gets scary because then it sounds like nobody's accountable. It's like when you go to a restaurant and somebody says, everybody's your waiter, that means nobody's my waiter. So who knows when my food's gonna come and if it's right. So shared accountability sounds very scary to professionals. So you can still have your direct accountability and responsibility, but still share the success for this customer experience in reducing fraud. I highly recommend things, some really practical things that I've seen work. Mandatory AI training where you get these different stakeholders from the business unit together to talk about these issues. Shared key performance indicators, things like resolution time to foster that one team mindset. And you need that one team mindset. Here's something I've seen done that's really, really cool. And I got to be a part of this. So I'm not making up a new idea or taking credit for it because I have to give people who mentored and coached me in the past credit for this. But basically, we had Fraud Fridays. You can do Fraud Mondays or whatever you want. And this casual cross team would get together. We would typically do it over a meal because people are happier and more receptive when they're eating. And so we would have this cross team huddle over coffee or a meal, and we would share the war stories of the week. And then somebody would say, you know, I could help you with that. Or, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Or then you're starting to get team recognition across. And then I picked up the phone and I called somebody in the other department and they were able to help me. This builds trust faster than any standard operating procedures, any manual. You need some structural wins. So you need to kind of have these shared KPIs like time to collaborate, time to closure, time to detection, and measure it at the beginning. It may be ugly and raw and hard to see that data, and then measure that over time. I would also say do things like ask to do rotational assignments. So can you take somebody from finance, somebody from fraud, somebody from security? Can you rotate them? Can they shadow each other? I mean, only you know staffing wise what's going to be practical and works best for you. But I really do feel like finding ways to collaborate both formally and informally is going to make a huge difference here.
It sounds so simple, but it's so true. It's honestly the people that I've interacted with that I've had to, even remotely, you know, that you have to get together for a certain meeting. I actually feel comfortable slacking them because before I don't know who to slack. I don't know if I feel comfortable slacking them, right? So, but if you establish those relationships, that's a great, I think it's simple, but it really is effective. So I think that's a great solution. I like that. And of course, KPIs, everybody.
What I loved about our Fraud Fridays was you didn't have to prepare an agenda. You didn't have a deck, you didn't have a whatever. It was like you're eating and it's like, okay, what happened to who this week? Or, hey, I need to tell everybody this story. You're not gonna believe this. And so it like literally was something we all looked forward to. And it just really made a huge difference.
I like that. I think that makes all the difference. No agenda. That's perfect.
Share war stories.
War stories, yes. That's perfect. So we've got some great ideas. Thank you for presenting some great ideas on how we can feel like all of it's a joint venture, right? This is something that we co-own. But even if we co-own it, there's still the challenge that a lot of the tools we're using to own our different parts are pretty siloed themselves, right? As we were saying, email, security, ERP, finance, right? So it's hard if there's not one person that's seeing the whole stories. So Theresa, most companies, they're still relying on these point solutions, the email filters, the callbacks, the ERP rules, not JP Morgan, but most. These attackers are moving fluidly, as we were saying, across all of these systems, these teams. Why are controls struggling to keep up? And what does a holistic defense actually look like when finance and security are working from the same playbook?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, many organizations have made significant investments in technology platforms that support a workflow, but those were for fighting the fraud wars of yesterday. And today, they're not serving us as well as they could. And this is why, in my mind, this is a really energizing time, because we now have the technology where we can say, like, look, if we cannot afford to move off of our legacy investment yet, oftentimes they're built and it's like, well, we need a 3-year return period, or, we spent this much money, it's not in the budget to do something brand new and just throw away what we have. So a lot of times it's not practical, but we do have to upfit our thinking. And the way we upfit our thinking is, again, kind of going to that human user story. Maybe you do events that just happened, but maybe you just kind of start from the beginning, like, fraud hasn't happened yet. Just tell me how this works. And then you could do the overlay of, like, okay, so now that we all have this common operating picture of how the customer experience works, let's overlay these fraud investigations and where were those thin spaces where we can do better. If the technology is going to fail you, which it might because of these legacy point of presence systems, that's where creating some type of a unified common operating picture where there's, sort of these shared KPIs and leveraging, maybe there's behavioral based analytics that get pushed out to all of the different departments. Maybe there's sort of, kind of a watch floor person of each of the departments where everybody knows who's on shift. And so if somebody sees something while you're working within your silo to disposition it, have an easy way to share it to the other units. So there's some different things that you can do if you're stuck in your legacy mode. You can look for newer technologies, which will enable that workflow, the collaboration, the sharing of alerts in real time. But you're going to also need some other, kind of like a retraining and a rethinking about picking your head up and having these groups do the cross collaboration. It's great if you have a budget and you're able to actually go into a more forward-looking picture where you're looking at behavioral-based analytics in real time across the different groups. But if you have to take a baby step first, that's where I would start that human user story. Then I'd create some type of a protocol across the different businesses, start working on the shared KPIs with that protocol. And to me, the human in the loop is going to be key. That's going to be kind of the glue where the systems leave off. The glue is going to be that human in the loop who's using kind of their training, their knowledge, their expertise, and then reasoning and sort of that human essence about of caring and wanting to do more than just what the black and white numbers say. And then that's where sort of those different connection points can happen.
I like how you brought up the human, because we always, I think, in today's age, we always jump to the technology first, right? How can we buy something that'll fix this? So I like that we've covered the human, but there also is the technology, because even in the JP Morgan that you mentioned, I think it was a behavioral AI system that they used, yes, in the case study.
Yes.
So how can AI help us break down these silos? I mean, how does it work?
Well, I think a couple of things. And again, so I would just, one thing I would caution people to do is I'm seeing AI implementations happen where, a vendor does a great job sort of selling, here's a technology, and the team runs and does a plug and play, and they get disappointed because they don't see the results they expected to see. So this is why I'm so big on kind of getting those human user stories and storyboarding. And then you go to the technology. So if it's something you're buying from a vendor and you say, here's our storyboard, talk to me about how the technology gets implemented to improve this storyboard. The other thing that I think people don't realize, like, you're probably very rich in data, very poor in intelligence from that data, being able to actually turn it into actionable intelligence. And so that's where technology can actually help you really take a look at, how do I elevate all this data that I have, knowledge residing in individuals, and how do I actually create, a run book, if you will, of if things start to look like this today, like at a pattern that's not usual, maybe that's, you know, a type of fraud. So I always say it's like looking for the anomalies within the anomalies. And this is where AI can really help you speed that up and be able to say to somebody in each department, hey, this is something in and of itself, by itself, it probably wouldn't have hit a scorecard, an algorithm, you know, anything that would be looked at. But in looking at the anomalies and the anomalies, AI could say, you know, past trends indicate when you're seeing something like this, that might mean you have a problem. You should call these other groups. And that's another thing that I'm seeing AI used for, is as you're trying to reinforce this new kind of run book of how we all interoperate with each other, you can actually load that into a small, you know, so an SLM, a small language model. Then you can put sort of an agent assistant on top of it. So while you're doing your natural work, it's checking the SOP, it's checking the data, and it's basically your assistant. It's not replacing you, and it's saying, these are some things I think you should prioritize and take a look at. These are some things that you may want to escalate. And then you have that human in the loop perspective that's making the integration work.
Yeah, no, Trustmi is a company that has behavioral AI to help stop socially engineered fraud. And the way that I often see it is that it almost gives you these like 3 strikes, you're out, right? It tells you puts a flag on the play. That seems weird. I don't think that's the right domain. That's the original domain. That vendor usually doesn't ask you to ask that email. And so those start to accrue. And so when you get to a certain point, you're like, okay, we know for sure that this is it. And so I think that's, once again, that unified picture of being able to see each of the flags that might not get looked at before because they're small or who knows, right? But when you put them all together, it's very, very clear. So I think that's a really fantastic way of putting it. So if people do this, they not only stop money from getting moved around and fraudsters stealing their money, but there are some other good side effects, I think, that come from this. And this is where you like to talk about the hand in glove synergy. And so, Theresa, we've talked about the breaking down the silos, the shared ownership, but what does this partnership actually do for the business? You know, beyond, you know, stopping the fraud, you know, what are the benefits of doing this?
Yeah, first of all, I know it sounds like as soon as you start to say we're going to have interoperability, we're going to have cross-team KPIs, people hear slow and confusing. And you know, naturally that can be an outcome if this isn't orchestrated right. But really, that hand in glove synergy that can happen here, your Fraud Fridays, whatever's going to work best in your culture, it's actually going to speed things up for you. Because you're going to be increasing efficiency across the teams. So instead of having 3 teams that all in their silos see something and they're all doing an investigation on it, what if you had AI helping you look at things from a cross-section perspective? And now one team, because they say, you know, sort of like in team sports, right? So I'm raising athletes, and my husband and I were athletes in college. And so you think about on the field, you yell, I got it, or you yell goalie, or you yell ball, or whatever the sport is that you're playing. Why do you do that? So that the whole team doesn't run into each other. So you yell, you're in your position, you yell, and the team supports you while you're doing what you're doing. And then you might yell out your teammate's name and kick the ball off to them. Can you tell them I'm a soccer mom and I played field hockey? So, but I use that team analogy because it gives everybody a visual. So can you imagine, instead of 3 independent units doing an investigation on an alert and then maybe picking their head up and collaborating, what if you had this AI automation which does an alert and basically says, Hillary, you have the ball. And Theresa, you're supporting her. And then Hillary shouts out, Theresa, I'm passing you the ball. The efficiency, the effectiveness, the fraud loss prevention that can happen here. Also, let's not forget, fraud and security are so tight. a fraudster can leverage their access to get into your company to steal your data or wreak havoc on your systems. So the more we can be integrated here, we're efficient, we're effective, we're elegant in our customer experience. Really, so many great things can happen. You're not going to sacrifice control. You're not going to create confusion. You can really cut down verification times and make decisions really either before the fraud happens or in real time as the fraud is happening.
Yes, no, this is exactly, actually, one of the resources I gave Tom to share with everybody that's joining us, there's a video of one of our customers from Armis, who is a very small, so not like a huge enterprise, but they were saying that they went from having behavioral AI help them, they went from 20 investigations about a month to nearly 0. Like, I mean,
Wow.
That's so much time back. That's so much time back. And I mean, and they're a small operation, so take that to a big enterprise level. So like, this really can give your team time back, and time is money, right? Not just the money that they're stopping from moving bank accounts, but also just giving your team the resources it needs to do what it needs to do. So, okay, well, that's a great note to end on. And now I'm thinking of all my times playing soccer. I was just thinking, what did I yell? I think I yelled mine. That's what I yelled when I took the ball. So I think clearly we've shown that there is a lot of benefits to doing this. It is not impossible. It is something that we can do. And so I've been able to ask all my questions. Theresa, thank you for answering all of mine. But Tom, let's get this Q&A started so we can have people ask Theresa directly their questions.
Yeah, sounds great. I've got some in there, so please, if you guys have a burning question, throw them in there. Otherwise, I've got like 6 or 8 of my own, and you probably don't want to just have me do it all. So, but no, let's start off with our first one. Let me get back to where I was here. So first one, this goes back to what we were talking about much earlier in the conversation, but with multiple teams viewing or researching the same data, this is when we're talking about whether finance or security should own the stuff. How does that affect the total cost of MDR, if that makes sense? So both teams are kind of doing the same thing.
So I'm assuming MDR, they're talking about mean detection and response time. And no, I mean, that's how it's happening today. So you kind of have the worst of all worlds in some regards today, because you either have nobody sees it, nobody works on it, or somebody sees something and hopes somebody else is working on it because they're busy, or you have everybody working on it. What I can see happen for organizations to take a step back and do this, you do the human user story, you get a common operating picture across these siloed organizations. You then figure out what are our key performance indicators going to be individually, what are they going to be shared, and then you leverage AI to help you figure out this workflow. And that's where, sort of in that team concept, yes, you've got a whole team on the playing field and they're trying to win. They're winning for the customer, winning for the company. And the way you win is everybody knows their lane, but then you call out to your teammate and say, you're going to take the lead right now. So you're either on defense or offense. So you have this like common operating picture, and then you leverage the AI with the scoring and the shared KPIs to say, this is in Tom's lane. And then Tom, we're here supporting you. So that way you're not doing either no investigations or multiple investigations. You kind of let somebody take the lead.
Nice, nice. That you make it sound so easy, though. I mean, you said it earlier, Hillary. She makes it sound so easy to do all this stuff.
I know
because
it's
you're
hard.
so calm and rational about it.
I know it's hard, but I also know it can be done because I lived in it and I worked in these trenches. And now I get the opportunity, the honor and the opportunity to work with smart companies like Trustmi and other organizations who are trying to tackle this. And so I see it can be done. And what I'm trying to do is share with people practical steps to get started, because a lot of organizations are like, no time, no money, can't change. And I said, okay, well, could you on Fridays get people together to share war stories? Yeah, okay, we could do that. Could you get a common operating picture and just maybe have a facilitator come in a couple days and just get a common operating picture of the human user story? Sure. So, just trying to help people have something that might energize them and something that's doable. I look at fraud and security and thinking about the customer experiences. Everything should be snackable and stackable, right? And so how do you kind of, have a little snack and then stack the snack, so that you can kind of get where you need to go?
That's great. I love that. I love that. I'm going to come back to you in a second with the war story things. We do have a question in the from the chat in there, but I want to I'm going to kind of kill two birds with one stone here. If I could speak correctly. We have a poll real quick for the audience. A special offer that's from the folks over at Trustmi. We're going to keep taking questions, but I just want to throw this out there. If you guys want to learn more about what's going on within all of this stuff, they have a cool demo. So if you want to book a demo, you can choose that. I've got the poll up there, so we'll respond accordingly with whatever you wish to receive, and maybe you don't want anything right now, and that's fine too. So, but real quick, going back, War Story. I like War Story Wednesday or Fraud Friday. Both, I like how you duplicate the letters. It just sounds more fun that way. But we had a question directly about that, so let me go back. Do you see a corporate mandate or board level expectation about like a Fraud Friday on shared responsibilities model to break down the silos between CIO and CFO office? What do you think about that? Should it be mandated?
I always worry about a rule saying you must do that, because then I see the external audit and external legal counsel showing up to tell you how to do it. And no offense to them, anybody who's in that profession, but it's like, I would love to see things just happen a little bit more authentically and organically if it's possible. But if your board has not asked you that question, that's also surprising.
Yeah. Next question. No, go for it. Yeah, you deserve a break. So the next one looks like we're getting into compliance. Our compliance team sometimes hesitates to share data across departments because of privacy rules. How do we balance information sharing with regulatory boundaries?
I know this is a tough one, and it used to really bother me when I worked inside the bank and certain things would come up and they'd say, you can't share that with the other group because of regulatory concerns. And I would push as hard as you can against those guardrails. So obviously don't break general counsel's guidance and advice because they're looking out for the best interests of the organization. But I would ask them, well, is there another way I can do this? So I would just keep it. So I never took no for an answer. So I would say, okay, I understand. And I would never want to break that regulatory framework or law or whatever it is you're talking about here. So how can I do it? So get them to tell you. If they tell you no, you can't share with this group and that group, say, but we need to share because it's a better customer experience. Trust is a currency. How can your customers trust you when fraud happens to them?
Right.
So part of your reputation is trust. So just keep asking the question, how can we reduce fraud? I believe it's these groups sharing these key pieces of information. We don't want to break the law. So how can we do it? And get people to really solution set versus can't, won't. So I know that's hard because I was in your seat. I have a feeling I know what you're hitting up against, why you can't share. And just keep asking until you're so annoying they have to design something that you can do.
Theresa, you told me this story when we started brainstorming for this session, and you said, I remember I kept asking, can I share this? And you're like, no. So you just kept asking. That's what you did?
I kept asking different ways until finally they were like, okay, let me go figure out a way for you to do that.
That's amazing.
Persistence.
The old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So, they wanted to help you, though, obviously, because they got something done for you. That's good.
Yes.
Next question here. We've been pushing for more cross-team fraud prevention, but leadership still sees it as a finance issue. Any advice on making this a board-level priority?
So if the board has not asked you for this, what could be interesting is there's nothing wrong with saying we want to create a working group. And so recommending to your CEO, we'd like to have a working group because we think we can do this, so think about how do you appeal to a CEO? We can do this better, faster, cheaper. We can reduce risk. So if you make the business case for why having a working group, just to start doing this, and then say, we would like to actually, be on the board agenda to do a joint report on our working group. Because typically on board agendas, at least I know for the boards that I sit on, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, is there's typically something around how do the books look? There's something around technology and security, and then there's typically something on investigations, fraud or otherwise. So I would say there's nothing wrong with going to the CEO and saying, we think we can solve for a bunch of different problems, be better, faster, cheaper, have our customers love us more, if we can do this working group, and we would love one day to do a joint report out to the board. I think you would win over your CEO on that.
Sounds reasonable. I like it. Next question. Steve's asking, at my company, each department measures success differently. Security looks at alerts, finance looks at accuracy and speed. What shared KPIs have you seen help unite these goals?
So one interesting shared KPI, and the security team is not going to love me for this, but customer delight scores. Because customers are delighted when things feel frictionless, but I'm also safe and nothing bad happened to me.
Right.
So a shared metric of customer delight scores is actually really, really important to finance, fraud, and cybersecurity, getting everybody to work together. Another shared metric can be how does our fraud loss work? And when we do the investigations, seeing them in buckets. So what was the access point for the fraud? It was customer email, which led to password reset, which led to legit credentials being passed to us. Okay, well, that kind of falls in the security realm. But it could also fall in the business realm of how do we educate our customers on the customer experience and teaching them this is never us. So when you see this, it's a red flag. So now as you do the investigations of what fraud is happening, and obviously you should be in your peer group as well. So you should be in whatever your information sharing analysis center is and talking to them about fraud and cybersecurity incidents. Now you can come back and say, okay, if we look at our investigations, what buckets are they falling in? And again, back to the team analogy, who has the ball right now to help us figure out how to reduce this? That's how you get to the shared metrics, is you start to look at your investigations and say, we tend to have a problem in these areas. So let's create a shared metric where we're all doing our part and making it a priority to get the losses down.
Again, makes sense. Thank you. All right, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, would that also work for, like, we're seeing a lot of vendor fraud. Do you think that, how would you do KPIs, like if you're seeing a lot of vendor fraud, and that's not necessarily customers, but you just apply the same idea to, like, how are vendors happy? Are they,
That's a really good question. So there's a couple of things in that vendor due diligence process. So your procurement team should be your BFF, because they're going to keep you safe, and they are actually part of the fraud loss prevention piece. So some things that your procurement can be asking your third-party vendors for is, we would like to see your third-party risk assessment and how you have been fraud red teamed, how you have been pen tested for your technology, and when is the last time you did a tabletop exercise where you either had a cyber incident or some level of fraud. And have your procurement write that into the vendor vetting and the vendor contract process. So if you've already signed the contract, you can still ask for it, but contractually they don't have to give it to you, but have it ready for renewal. So I agree with you. I think third party tends to be hard. And guess what? Guess where the fraudsters and cyber criminals are going? To the third party vendors, because that's a harder, it's outside. If you think about a boat in the water, right? So my husband was in the Navy. So if you think of boat when it's in the water, you can see that once the anchor goes down, all the way down, you can see the chain on the boat. So you can trust looking at the chain, like all the links are together and I know what that looks like. But once it gets into murky waters and it gets where you can't see it anymore, like that's a weird area, because it's like, is it really anchored to a rock or is it actually anchored to something that's going to start moving? So that's where third parties end up being the anchor that you can't see. So you can't validate it as easily because you can't see it. So that's where those third party requests and third party assessments can be really, really helpful to ask them to provide those.
Thank you for that. One more audience question just came in. This one's actually pretty solid. What regulations can you reference to help move board or owners in the right direction? Anything?
Oh, sure. Well, some of it's going to be based on the industry that you're in. So for example, and where you do business. So for example, in the United States, lucky us, we get 50 different privacy laws. Isn't that amazing? Yay. So if you happen to do business in New York or California, they have some of the most stringent privacy laws. So take a look at those, because a lot of times, I know you'll think, well, how's that going to help us do information sharing? But it'll actually talk about your responsibility and duty of care to actually protect the customer from fraud if you really read those privacy laws. So I would actually start with some of those privacy laws. There are also some great regulatory best practices frameworks you can look at too. So for example, if you are looking at leveraging AI across the different units to help you sort of that common operating picture and get some efficiencies and effectiveness, you can look at, so the ISO is coming out with an AI standard. You've got MITRE has actually come out with Atlas. So you've got a couple different standards that you could sort of benchmark your implementations against and talk to your boards and say, look, as we're implementing this AI, we're going to look at, ISO has some standards. We're going to look at MITRE Atlas, or you can look at, if you do business in the EU has an AI Act, and you can leverage those to show, one, we're going to hold ourselves up to these standards. Two, we have to hold ourselves up to these standards. And then three, crosswalk for them. Here's the work that we're doing, and here's how it answers to these different regulatory pressures and frameworks. It also doesn't hurt. To read whatever the regulator is for your industry, to read any rulings they've come out with. And sometimes they will do a common operating picture of like, we did this many regulatory reviews. They anonymize the name of the companies, but they will do common findings. You can leverage those. There's a whole lot that you can use. Don't stand too much behind them. So I'm not a big fan of like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and we could get fined if we're not in validation, because that's been used for decades. What I like to do is say, look, this sets some minimum standards, and we want to benchmark all the work we do and make sure the customers love it, that we're hitting the financial statement goals, and that we're in compliance. But compliance is really the baseline. That's the table stakes to play. That's not the best practice.
Thank you. Great answer. I've got one question left. It's my own, and I just kind of want to leave us with maybe a little bit of levity, if you don't mind. You were the CIO at the White House, so I want to dig into that. Just give us a quick, fun story of like maybe something that was off the beaten path that happened, or just something interesting that what was weird that happened at the White House while you were a CIO that obviously you could share.
Okay, so this is. I don't know why this came to my mind, so I'm just going to go with it. But a lot of people may recall, like President George W. Bush had two dogs, Barney and Miss Beasley. Barney was pretty cranky most of the time, but my kids always loved seeing them, and that was always really great. But he also had a cat. And I still remember I was going down underneath the White House, and a lot of people don't realize, like, the White House, it's not really built for like our modern age, right? So you have to preserve this historic building while finding ways to upfit it without destroying the historic building. So I'm downstairs in the basement of the building, and I'm down there with somebody from basically he had been in the White House Communications Agency, and now as a civilian, he was helping us with some different things. And he said, let me go get my keys and a flashlight. I'm like, okay, we're down here looking at fiber closets, trying to figure out what fiber we're going to pull from underneath. And as we're going around the corner, I looked and I said, that's really strange. What's the president's cat doing down here in the basement? And he says, aren't you cute? That's not a cat, it's a rat. And he's like, that's why I keys. So there weren't a lot of rats in the White House, but because they took care of that. But what I will say is a lot of people don't realize, like, in these old historic buildings, and Washington, D.C. really was a swamp. There's the water is like right underneath the White House. And so you can put politics on that if you want to about rats, but yeah, so he jingled his keys and said somebody would be taking care of that. So anyways.
That's fun. I love that.
Okay, one other funny story though, because this one's a little bit more interesting, but so one more quick funny story. So when I went into, so there's something called the usher's office, and if you're a Downton Abbey fan, it's kind of a little bit like that way. And so, but what I noticed was everything in the usher's office in the pantry, there was a barcode on everything, like every roll of toilet paper, every like pack of flour, the toothpaste tubes, the chicken breast, like the thing that had the chicken breast, there was like a big barcode on that, like everything. And I was like, oh, this is for logistics to make sure we don't run out of things. So I go up to the Admiral and I said, who was running the usher's office, and I said, I was brand new, I probably just a couple weeks in. So I'm doing my walkabouts. I'm doing a tour and learning how everything works. And then I'll figure out, systems and all that as I get my clearance to figure it out. And so I said, hey, Admiral, I wanted to ask you, I have a hunch. I know what these barcodes are for. And he goes, oh, really? No one ever gets it right. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to try. And I said, it's to make sure we don't run out of something, because it would be embarrassing to run out of like flowers for the Queen's visit or filet mignon if a visiting foreign head of state were here. And he goes, nope, absolutely wrong. And I was like, oh, I know, because I read a lot of Vince Flynn novels and Brad Thor novels. And I was like, it's to make sure nobody gets poisoned. And he was like, no, that's actually not it. And I was like, well, then what is it? And I went through a few more examples, and he says, well, the way appropriations work is whoever's eating that chicken breast, like if it's the first family in the personal residence with friends visiting, that's one bucket of money. But if the chicken breast is served on a platter in the Eisenhower and it's visiting heads of state, that's a different appropriations bucket of money. And if it's the Queen of England, that's a visiting foreign head of state, totally different bucket of money. So the barcodes are to make sure we scan every single item and it gets charged to the right bucket of money. So for those of you who are Americans on here, that's your American taxpayer dollars at work. We improved the system a little bit, but honestly, it was really ingenious if you think about it. It is. Because they just did it like, this is how a kitchen works. It was like, take out the chicken breast, just scan it. Scan the barcode, 50 chicken breasts for a visiting foreign head of state. Anyways, yeah, down to the flower stems. I went into, so the White House has its own flower shop, as you can imagine. And I went in, she's making these beautiful flower arrangements, but every flower, she pulls it out, cuts off a barcode, scans it, puts it in the flower arrangement.
Wow. I had no idea. Wow, we learned, if nothing else, I learned that today as well as amongst all the other stuff. Great. Mm-hmm. I love those stories. Thank you, Theresa Payton. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you out in the audience. If you still have the poll up, go ahead and answer that if you want to book some time with the folks at Trustmi. Otherwise, we've got episode 6 on the way. Hacked Minds: How Gen AI Exploits Human Bias in Social Engineering. This is coming up on Thursday, November 6th. So not too far off. If you're here today and joined us, we're going to roll your registration into that event as well. So if you don't want it for whatever reason, just shoot me an email and I'll remove you. But you're not going to want to miss this one. I met Jessica Barker at RSA a few years back. She is awesome. She's going to share a lot of great information. I think you're going to want to see this. So don't miss that. That concludes our time together today. Grab your CPE attendance PDF if you haven't done that already. Grab those resources. Lots of stuff in there. Grab that report for sure. And then we've got more stuff on the way, like we always do at Secure World. We're in the midst of our in-person events. We've got Entrust coming up on October 28th, unlocking digital trust with HSMs. More stuff on the way. So check these out. I've got links in that resource tab for you to register for all this stuff if you want. Otherwise, we'll see everybody at the next remote session or at episode 6 with Dr. Jessica Barker. So thanks again, Theresa and Hillary. You guys nailed it. Hit it out of the park. I could come up with a few other cliches, but I want to seem genuine because you guys are actually awesome. My homework out there to the folks in the audience, if you enjoyed our conversation today, say something on LinkedIn. Throw that link in there and make people come and see this stuff, because this is how we can actually help each other with getting rid of these silos, right? Arm each other with awareness, education, and these types of talks, and we can actually affect some change. So please share this information with somebody today. That's my homework for you. I can't check it. It's the honor system. So we'll see everybody at the next remote session. Be well. Have a great weekend.